Before we move over to the how to close the deal conversation, I forgot that I haven't given you guys an update on the social media manager episode. And that was the episode where I talked about my friend Chioma who runs Wood Lab. Well, I think she's the manager of Wood Lab, more like it, not like she's one of the founders. And that is a tech hub here in Abuja, and they're into software development primarily. And so she needed a software manager, and I made an episode or two about the adventures that she was having in that regard, and also the adventures that I was having in trying to hook up with someone who could do that, and the lessons that we could learn from that whole episode about how to improve our sales. So, you guys will be glad to know that the search is now over, and they do, in fact, have a social media manager. But just as I suspected, the person who they got to be the social media manager isn't the person who I referred to, the person that I mentioned in the episode. So, you remember that, as if you're a long time listener, that I made the referral, and I didn't think that the way that the person followed up, or rather, I thought that the lack of follow up wasn't a good sign of things to come. And I think there's some more lessons that we can get from that episode about how we should go about promoting and conducting our businesses. And even though this is something that is tech related, I have said time and time again that the principles of sales and marketing are universal, more or less, and so we adapt them to our own personal circumstances and to the industry or to the context in question. So even though we're talking about a social media manager for a software / IT development firm, the principles are still the same. So you remember that the person that I gave a leg up to be the social media manager to provide those services eventually reached out, but this was over direct messages. Well, understandable, since at the time the person was out of the country. I still think, on this whole thing of whether DM or over the phone, what I still think is that if in the beginning, the people who are looking for the service, that is I, who was trying to make the referral, and Sharma, who needed the social media manager. Now, if both of us reached out over the phone as the person intending to make the referral and the person who wanted to procure the service, I really think we should meet customers where they are. So if people start off with you by making a phone call, I really think you should call them back. If people start the conversation off with email or DMs, then I think it's safe to continue with that mode that they have chosen. But eventually, you'll find that dealing over the phone is going to be the most efficient way to interact with potential clients. And that's because you have well, first off, it's quicker. You guys can have a 2-minute conversation very quickly and thrash out everything rather than sending DMs back and forth over 4 or 5 days. And then over the phone, you're going to be able to pick up things like tone, vocal inflection, things like that. And they help you gauge whether this person is interested, what seemed to hit the spark, or whether you guys are gelling or not, and you see that was one of the flaws in this case. So the DMs fly back and forth, and then the social media manager, she makes a comment that she's not in Abuja, and that's pretty much where the conversation went dead. And so I found this out days later when I hit my friend up, Chioma, and I'm like, hey, how far? What about that lady that I hooked you up with? How do things go? And she said, I don't think she was interested in having a conversation. I was like, really? And then I asked for more details. And that's where I pretty much just got the picture that once she brought up the thing that I'm not in Abuja, the conversation went dead. Now, it's understandable that these things happen, and they do happen over DM or email, but you'll appreciate that from the suggestions that I'm going to make right now, that if this conversation had happened over the phone, it would have been a lot easier to revive the conversation and to gauge interest. And you still could have done that over the text. Now, for some reason, people fail to appreciate that when you're having these sorts of conversations over the phone, you need to gain a certain measure of what will I say, feedback. You have to move the conversation along. So it's not just enough to put out an assertion and then just let things die. So if, as a social media manager, you put it out there that, oh, I'm not in Abuja, well, it would help if you follow up with something like, I'm not in Abuja at the moment, I'm going to be back on so and so. I mean, you need to put it out there so that the recipient of the message understands exactly what you mean by this kind of assertion. So, I'm not in Abuja, does that mean I am not in Abuja at all? I'm not based in Abuja? Or I'm currently out of the country at the moment and I'm going to be back in Abuja on so and so date. You could also ask questions that try to get you some feedback. Like, for instance, you say, "Oh, I'm not in Abuja. Is remote working going to be an issue?" And then, in this case, Choma would have now had the response, the chance to respond like, "Oh, okay, remote working is going to be an issue. We want somebody who's going to come into the office." And then, in that case, you know that your deal is dead in the water. If not in Abuja means you've relocated and you're out of the country. But then, if it means that you're going to be back, then you're going to be able to follow up with, "Okay, in that case, I'm going to be back in Abuja in 3 weeks' time. Does that time frame work for you, or do you need someone to start those services up immediately?" From the scenarios that I've thrown around here, you've seen, I hope you guys can appreciate that conversation didn't necessarily have to die at that point of I am not in Abuja. So these are ways that you could have extended the conversation and to get feedback and then to move things along. Because understandably, from my friend's point of view, you just say I'm not in Abuja and then crickets from that point on, then it's easy to conclude that, okay, this person was not interested in having a conversation. And it's a pity because the person at Woot Lab eventually did hire. Woot Lab is the organization that Choma works for. So it's a pity because the person at Woot Lab eventually did hire is also not an Abuja person, and so it was it's going to be a remote gig. I guess coronavirus has taught us that some functions can be handled remotely, and so not everybody has to come into the office. And so the person that they got eventually, it turned out to be a remote gig. So things didn't necessarily have to end up the way that they did. Which is not to say that it could have been a done deal with the person that I referred to, because they could have gone ahead with the conversation only to find out that styles are different, aesthetics are different, or what's that word? Specifications, yeah, that I might not be able to agree to specifications and things like that. So it's not a done deal, but I'm just saying that things didn't have to die the way that they did. And it's something that we wedding industry professionals can learn about, because we make these kinds of mistakes where you just put something out there without qualifying it, without getting some feedback, and without trying to move the question along. And so that is something that we shouldn't make a habit of doing. We should always try to get feedback in the conversation. And that's one reason why whenever I'm trying to coach people along, especially wedding photographers and these kinds of things, is to get them to end the email or the DM or whatever it is with a question. Because if you end it with a question, then the person has to reply. When they reply, you're either going to get more information or you're going to get the feedback that you need to move the conversation along. So you don't just respond, I'm not in Abuja, or I'm not based in Abuja. So you respond, I am not based in Abuja. Would transportation costs be a problem since your wedding is in Enugu? Don't just assume that because you are based in Abuja or you're not based in Enugu and that transportation is going to be a problem. So you don't just put it out there, I'm not based in Enugu, full stop. I'm not based in Abuja, full stop. You ask the question, would transportation costs be a problem. If you hear no, then oh well, it's not like you were expecting the thing to move ahead. But then you might get an interesting answer. The person might say, well, it depends. How much transportation are we talking about? Or the person might say, oh, we have a bus that is taking family members from Abuja to Enugu since everybody is there. Would the bus option work for you? There are loads of ways that these conversations can go. So you don't just put things out there without qualifying and without looking for feedback. Because I don't know why. A lot of us just seem to fall into this thing, and there are lots of conversations that die that way. And it's just a guess, but in my own opinion, I think if you have 20 conversations like this in a year that die this way, like, oh, I'm not in Abuja, I'm not in Enugu, it's possible that out of the 20 conversations, you could have ended up getting 2 or 3 of those gigs. Now, think about it. If you're doing 2 or 3 of those gigs, and let's say you're a wedding planner at 500K margin each, or you're a wedding photographer at maybe 150K margin each, or 100K margin each, it is still something. Now, even if that profit margin is not enticing enough for you, the reality is that for those of us in the wedding and the event space, the more people that we talk to, the more money that we make. So the more weddings that we shoot, the more weddings that we plan, the more weddings that we do decor for and all that, the more opportunities we have to make money. Because we're talking to new people who have new and wider social circles, and there's more chances for repeat business and for referrals. So let's not continue this habit of just putting something out there without qualifying it and without asking for feedback on the particular issue. We need to ask, is that going to be a problem? What else? Well, we've already explored other kinds of scenarios at which the conversation could have gone. But anyway, I hope you guys so far can appreciate that having this kind of conversation is a lot easier over the phone. Because if you're over the phone, it's easy for the client to gauge when you say, I'm not in Abuja. Easy for the client to gauge and say that, okay, I'm not based in Abuja is said with an element of finality or said with an element of hesitation. And they're going to know whether to move forward or to probe more or not to probe some more. That's assuming that you, as the wedding planner, as the photographer, let's assume that you're not sophisticated enough to guide this conversation along. It's from the vocal prompts that the potential customer gets, that they're going to know if there's road to move along, to move ahead, or if there isn't any room. And and it's also the same thing from you. If you, the professional, the planner, the photographer, the videographer, you're the one handling this phone call, you're going to be able to tell from tone and from inflection when you guys have reached a hard pass and when there's room for progress, and when you say something that interests the bride or the groom, or whether they're disinterested on a particular issue. So these are some of the reasons why I say please phone over DM or email, especially if in the beginning they reached out over the phone. If they reach out over the phone, it's kind of tacit permission, or no, not tacit, let's say implicit. It's kind of implicit information that is okay for you to call back. So call back where you can. But of course, if they initiate over DM, then start with the DM or start with the email or start with the PM. PM is a private message, I think. I think you LinkedIn folks say PM instead of DM. So DM for Instagram, PM for LinkedIn. So whether DM, email, or PM, however they initiate, just start with that. At some point, if you can guide it over the phone, that would be nice. What is going to kill this conversation dead, especially when you're using this text-based media, is where you say things and you don't qualify or you don't ask for feedback. So please, don't just make assertions. Always qualify the assertions that you put there. Give it some nuance and then ask for feedback. If you ask for feedback, then they respond. You have more information, and then you know which direction you can use to drive the sales process forward. So that's the recording for today. Thank you very much for listening to the Sales for the Nigerian Wedding Industry podcast. I'm your host, Abuja-based event and wedding photographer, and also business consultant, sales consultant. I'm just getting used to this new outro. Yeah, so Abuja-based sales consultant and event media professional, Tavish Mayedu. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll catch you guys at the next recording, and I think we have gotten all the things out of the way. So the next recording, we should be able to move right into how to close the deal how to close the deal conversation. Is going to be based off the material that I did for Kairos Real Estate, which is Dibanji's real estate and property investment firm. So it's going to be based off the material that I had with their sales team, which was how to close the deal in real estate. So we'll discuss the principles there and see how it applies to those of us in the wedding and the event space. So thank you very much for your time and your attention. I'll catch you guys at the next recording.